come in, make yourself comfortable. We have goodies here today, and we're very pleased that you can get them there, or you can save it safe, and after the church, we can go into the hall and perhaps have a chat. Hopefully, Jack will be able to join us there if we haven't tired him out too much. Anyways, we are very, very fortunate to have with us today as our presenter, Jack Hanna, who is a history raconteur. He leads history walking tours where he's currently living in Ottawa and lectures on history. He does, however, have significant attachment to Calgary and Canmore, where he has relatives and friends. Jack is a former journalist and teacher. He has researched Ralph Connor and lectured on his great, gigantic figure in Canadian world's history and the United Church. And I'd like to welcome him and ask him to please lead us. In this historical tour.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm going to start off with a question. If you didn't know the answer, stick a hand up. Sunday, January 25th, 1891. What happened in this room?
First church.
Sorry?
First service.
First church service. Inaugural church service. Brand new church and a brand new minister. This guy was ordained 6 months earlier in Calgary. His
Can
name
everyone
was
hear you?
Sorry?
Can everyone hear you?
All good?
Is there anyone that can't hear you? Okay.
So, the brand new minister ordained 6 months earlier in Calgary. This was his first mission as a minister. His name was Charles Gordon. The church is not named for Charles Gordon. It's named Ralph Connor. This fellow, a handful of years earlier, started writing novels, and he was unbelievably, phenomenally successful worldwide. He was Canada's best-selling author for a century, up until Margaret Atwood and Robert Munch came along. He wrote 31 books, 26 novels, most of them bestsellers. His two top books, Glengarry School Days and Man from Glengarry, sold almost 4 million copies worldwide combined. He sold well over 5 million books in total worldwide. They used to say he was read from Calgary to Calcutta. He was praised in every publication from Harper's Bazaar to the Manchester Guardian. The Boston Transcript said, he touches the chords which vibrate luxuriously in the popular heart. The Chicago Tribune, so intense that one grinds his teeth. The San Francisco Chronicle, passionate appeals to all that is best in human nature. Upon his death, the Times of London ran an obituary. And they said this, oh, there's his books. I'm going to back up a little bit. This slide shows a fraction of the printings of Glengarry School Days. There were dozens and dozens and dozens of printings of that novel that was sold for well over 1 million copies. In the Times obituary, they said, he was known wherever the English language was read. But perhaps the best statement about him comes from his fellow novelist, Jack Hanna, who said this, it's hard to believe the impact this man had. So, all those novels, 6 of which, by the way, were made into movies. This is back in the silent black and white era. 6 of them made into movies, one starring one of the foremost starlets in Hollywood at the time. Ralph Connor defined Canada for much of the world. He defined Canadians and Canada for people all over the English-speaking world and for Canadians themselves. And he was famous across the English-speaking world. But hey, writing was a sideline for him. This guy, put aside Ralph Connor, think about Charles Gordon. Charles Gordon had a spectacularly adventurous and colorful life and was a massively important figure in history in Canada in his church and even internationally. He was a pastor where he went to Winnipeg, started out with a small lumber building outside of the village part of Winnipeg and a handful of people in the pews. And he built that in a decade and a half into a congregation that had a massive stone church and well over 1,000 parishioners. He was a frontline padre in the trenches in World War I. The Winnipeg General Strike, 1919, the biggest and one of the most violent labor disruptions in Canadian history. In the aftermath, the Manitoba government had to do something. What did they do? They formed a big, powerful labor relations commission, made him the chair, put him in charge. He went on speaking tours of Canada, the United States, Britain, Australia. He packed the houses. People were turned away. He delivered the address, the League of Nations in New York City. In fact, once a year they have a sermon. He delivered the annual sermon to the League of Nations. He had a cottage in northwestern Ontario, near Canmore. Not one, but two British prime ministers vacationed at his cottage, one bringing his kids with him. That was Arthur Balfour. And of course, the hospitality was returned. He was entertained at 10 Downing Street. He was the national head of the Presbyterian Church in Canada's moderator. He was a driving force, went on a huge speaking tour for the formation of the United Church of Canada. He made a fortune, fabulously rich, and lost it all. But at any point, if you had asked him to describe himself, and lots of people did, friends spoke about how he talked to himself, interviewers asked him about himself, he had a simple answer. He said, I'm a preacher. And he meant it. Everything he did was an extension of his ministry, part of his ministry. And that includes the writing, especially the writing. He was a clergyman. Before everything else, his role in life was to bring God into people's lives and into their hearts. The novels, yeah, of course they're morality tales. Bad people do bad things. They are selfish, they're greedy, they're destructive of other human beings, they maim, they kill. But somehow, in the end, often, they turn things around. They find something good, they turn their lives around, they turn to good. Good people trying to do good things in the novels, they falter, they lose faith in themselves, they have doubts, but they find what they need to move ahead, often with the help of people around them, their friends. One quick example is I made. In the novel Sky Pilot, Tale of Foothills, there is a 14-year-old girl. This girl is a spark plug. She is a tomboy. She lives on a fairly isolated ranch. The first time the minister visits the ranch, he gets off his horse, and the dogs gather around him, and they're barking and snapping at him. He doesn't like it, of course. And the 14-year-old girl is watching from the porch, and she says to the minister, if you kick that dog, I will kill you. And the minister believes it. The girl lives on horseback, always riding. One day, she and her horse are caught up in a cattle stampede. The horse falters and falls. She's crippled. She is paralyzed from the waist down. She will never walk or ride again. And she confronts the minister. She says, why did God do this to me? And she spits at him, I hate God. Well, the question is, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? The minister, in simple English but very eloquent, provides the girl in a couple of conversations the usual explanation the church gives for why God allows bad things to happen to good people. But here's the thing. As the novel unfolds, this girl has a role in her community that only she and her situation can fulfill. Now, does Ralph Connor say, oh, look, God had time for her? No, he's not that obtuse. He never says a word of that. But that's part of the plot of the story, and the reader has to pick it up almost subconsciously. So, Ralph Connor. He was born in 1860 in a log cabin in the middle of nowhere, farming country, halfway between Ottawa and Montreal, Glengarry County. He lived there in Glengarry County until the age of 10. The spot where he grew up was then and still is really just a crossroad of two county roads. But it's an incredibly Scottish place. And he's deeply rooted in his Scottish heritage. Glengarry County, up until today, now, holds the biggest Highland Games in North America every summer. Glengarry County is right there, just before you leave Ontario. That's Mom and Dad. His parents were both well educated, his mother especially so for a woman at that time. His father immigrated from Scotland, from the Highlands, specifically to minister to Gaelic communities in Canada, of which there were plenty. And by Gaelic community, I mean in the houses, in the farmhouses, people spoke Gaelic. On the streets, in the shops, they spoke Gaelic. These were Gaelic communities. And often people didn't speak English or French. They started out in a small community near Sherbrooke, Quebec. Then they moved to Glengarry County, where their son, Charles Gordon, Ralph Connor, was born in a log cabin, a Manchester log cabin. And at the age of 10, they moved to a community near Stratford, Ontario, where they remained for 19 years. Well, pardon me, remained permanently. The father was the minister there for 19 years.
Where?
Connor, for him, Glengarry County was always very important. His Scottishness, he was proud of his Scottish roots. On his father's side, he claimed he could trace his family tree back to Mary Queen of Scots. On his mother's side, he claimed he could go back to Robert the Bruce. The father, by the way, was how can I put this? One historian describes him as a man of passionate enthusiasm, vivid imagination, and intense and fervent faith. He was also a showman given to dramatic displays. For example, there was a religious dispute in the community, and he got his followers together, and he rode the streets of Cornwall at night in torchlight parade on horseback to make their point. That was Dad, a bit of a hellfire preacher. He also played the bagpipes, and Ralph Connor, Charles Gordon, his bedtime stories were the tales of Scottish heroes and Scottish lore. Some of Connor's best-selling novels, Glengarry School Days, Man from Glengarry, are set in Glengarry, but he sprinkles throughout his other novels what he called Canadian Highlanders. That's people born in Glengarry. If they're born in Glengarry, they were very Scottish. And I'm going to give you one quick example from Black Rock. The setting. This is a lumber camp west of here. The title is Black Rock, A Tale of Selkirk. It's not really set in the Selkirk. It's probably set closer to here. So it's a lumber camp west of here. A young minister has come to the nearby village, and he preaches the lumber camp occasionally. And a fella named Bill Keefe is bad-mouthing the new minister in the bunkhouse. Here's what happens. Big Sandy McNaughton, a Canadian Highlander from Glengarry, rose up in wrath. Bill Keefe said with deliberate emphasis, "You'll just keep your dirty tongue off the minister, and as for your pay, it's little he sees of it, or anyone else, except Mike Slavin when you're too dry to wait for someone to treat you, or perhaps Father Ryan when the fear of hellfire's on you." The men stood amazed at Sandy's sudden anger and length of speech. "Bon, that's good for you, my bully boy," said Baptiste, a wiry little French-Canadian. Sandy's sworn ally and devoted admirer ever since the day when the big Scotsman, under great provocation, had knocked him clean into the river and then jumped in to save him. It was not until afterwards I learned the cause of Sandy's sudden wrath, which urged him to such unwanted length of speech. It was not simply that the Presbyterian blood carried with it reverence for the minister and contempt for papists and Fenians, but that Sandy had a vivid remembrance of how, only a month before, the minister got him out of Mike Slavin's saloon and out of the clutches of Keefe and Slavin and that gang of bloodsuckers. Keefe started up with a curse. Baptiste sprang to Sandy's side, slapped him on the back and called out, "You kill him, by God, and I'll eat him up, me." So, he followed in Dad's footsteps, he studied for the ministry. He was a student at the University of Toronto. He then pursued his theological studies at Knox College in Toronto and a year studying theology at the University of Edinburgh. He interspersed his studies with a little bit of work. He worked for years as a high school teacher in order to pay his way. In his studies, he heard inspiring lectures about the need for missionaries in Western Canada. One particular series of lectures given by the Reverend James Robertson, who was the superintendent of missions to Manitoba Northwest, really inspired him, and Robertson became his mentor. Missionaries were all fit. He wanted to go west. Now, this was a tough mission. Apparently, cowboys and miners and lumberjacks were not inclined to go to church. He was ordained in 1990 in Calgary. He moved to Banff. He never did live in Canmore. He resided in Banff. There was no manse, so he boarded with Mrs. Robertson. He preached here every second. He was heavily involved, by the way, in building the church. It probably started before he was here, but he was heavily involved in getting it done. He preached here every second Sunday. He and the Methodist minister teamed up. One would take the Banff church, one would take the Canmore church, so he's here every second Sunday. He would ride here on horseback. There were two services, a morning service, but the big one that lots of people attended in Canmore was the evening service. That's when the place was packed. He was the only Presbyterian clergyman between Calgary and Nelson, BC. When he arrived in Canmore, that's Canmore, the main street had one side. There was a collection of stores, shacks, and hotels, all of them unpainted. On the other side of the street, there was a rail yard. So this was the division point for the CPR, largely because of the coal deposits here. There were plenty of spur lines. There was a station. There was a huge railway workshops. At the back of the yards, on one or two of the lines, there were rail cars that were not moving. They were functioning as houses for the people who lived here. And beyond the rail lines, beyond the rail yards, you had small houses, log cabins, shanties, huge boarding houses, and a handful of dugouts. The dugouts were caves excavated into the base of the mountain, and across the front they put a lumber wall with a window door. The congregation. The congregation was mainly working men, miners, railroaders. There were a few families, a few cowboys, sprinkled with Chinese and indigenous. But here's the thing. There was a surprising diversity of social class. As one observer put it at the time, quote, a sprinkling of better-born fellows sadly down in fortune. The down and outs of the aristocracy of both Britain and Canada found their way here. Often, they suffered alcohol problems. But a lot of people from aristocracy, at a time when university degrees were rare and only obtained by the children of rich families, there were many men who had university degrees who went down the mines during the day and went back to the one house at night. One mine manager joked you could scarcely throw a stone around his mine without hitting the son of a lord or a duke. Mountain house. We talked about boarding houses for the miners. This is one that was in Canada. Gordon, alcoholism was rampant. This was a hard-drinking town, and a lot of the people who had problems went up here from the aristocracy had alcohol problems. Gordon had some sympathy. He says, a man, week after week, goes down that mine day after day for long shifts, in the dark, underground, pecking away at rock, and he comes up, and what is it? The vast bulk of these men were unmarried, they're in the middle of nowhere, there's nothing for them even on the surface. He described it as a life of tedium. And the relief of that tedium, whiskey. Some examples. From the people who wrote about this period in Canmore. The grandson of the Duke of Wellington, he, of the Battle of Waterloo, was with the Northwest Mounted Police and was said to have an alcohol problem. A former fellow who almost did not quite finish his medical studies at university was working as a miner and otherwise was a hermit in a shanty. He was said to have had a bad turn in love. A woman who kept one of the hotels in Canmore, which one observer described as the least worst of Canmore's hotels, was said to have fled from an abusive husband back in Ontario, who was a very prominent man there. But let's give Ralph Connor the last word on the people he met here. Among them are to be found the most enterprising, the most daring of the peoples of the old lands, those men of adventurous spirit who left homes of comfort, often of luxury, because of the stirrings in them to be and to do some worthy thing. Those others who, outcast from their kind, sought to find in these valleys, remote and lonely, a spot where they could forget and be forgotten. And then there are the wild ones, Connor again. Freed from all restraints of social law, with a new freedom beating in their hearts, some rode fierce and hard the wild trail to the cut bank of destruction. Ralph Connor himself, what was he like? Well, he was tall, slender, had a soft, pale, intellectual face. He was an outdoorsman. He knew how to handle a rifle and a canoe. He liked horses, and the stronger and more spirited, the better. His hobby, lifelong hobby, was finding saplings with gnarled roots, which he could turn into walking sticks or canes, which he gave away as gifts. He once said, because of his outdoor ways, he once said, "I should have been an Indian," and was indeed, by then of his life, an honorary chief of 3 tribes. He played the piano, guitar, banjo, and flute, and he could be the life of the party. One friend said that Gordon, quote, could unbend more completely than any man of his age I've ever known. Another friend said he was known for tomfoolery. He had a huge repertoire of spiritual songs, but also French-Canadian folk tunes and humorous tunes, and he didn't hesitate to ham it up and sing a tune off-key in a comic voice. In his cottage at Canmore, there was an initiation ritual for people visiting for the first time, a practical joke. It was a sizable cottage, and there was a large table where people took their meals. The table was covered with oilcloth. And of course, no table was perfectly flat. So if you were a visitor the first time, Connor's kids and friends would be in on this joke. The kids and friends would be along the sides of the table. Connor sit at one end of the table, and you as the honored guest would be invited to the other end, which would be the low end. At some point in the meal, on a signal, the kids along the edge would inconspicuously lift up a little bit the oilcloth on both sides. So now you got a trough running on the table. And Charles Gordon would then inconspicuously pour his glass of water in that trough, would run down the table and spill in the lap of the guest. And one observer said, Connor was an important man in Canadian society. He had a lot of very important, prestigious guests. Didn't matter. Everybody got that initiation. He was political. All of his life he wanted bamboos. He led a movement across the prairies called Ban the Bars, and he was very successful, particularly in Manitoba. He also wanted to improve the life of working people and immigrants. He was passionately British, a big fan of Britain and the Empire. In his preaching, he was a skilled orator. One observer said, his voice is soft and clear. He often started slowly and then built until he was like an Old Testament prophet. Another observer said, he reads the expression. His prayers are reverent and intimate. He speaks clearly and expresses himself in chaste and elegant language. The atmosphere is unforgettable. He always carried his guitar everywhere he went. He liked to pick hymns that people know from their childhood, remind them of home. Things like the Sweet By and By or Shall We Gather the River. He also was concerned about the nature of the pursuit of religion. He, as did many others, believed that religion was something that the ladies, women, and genteel men pursued, but not anybody else. He wanted a more robust form of religion, one that went right into the hearts and the lives of ordinary people. A religion that would be relevant to everybody and simple to the lives of everybody. Now, his novels bring religion and morality into the lives of frontiers people. Men who work in mines or logging camps, swear and curse, who drink and fight and brawl. If you want a more robust religion, those are your characters, right? Later in life, an interviewer asked him what his greatest contribution was to Canadian culture. He responded, drawing rooms to parlors. He was in Banff and Canmore for 2.5 years. He preached either at Banff or Canmore every Sunday. He would ride on horseback to Canmore to preach here. As I say, he traded off with a Methodist minister in Banff. Weekdays, he traveled to lumber camps. He traveled on horseback, by train, even by raft or canoe. To get to one of the lumber camps he liked to go to, he had to paddle a raft across a lake. If there was a clergyman visiting Banff as a tourist, Charles Gordon would lean on him to take the Sunday service. And that way, he could go to a logging camp to do the service on the Sabbath. He made a trip. At one point, he found a clergyman to fill in for him for 2 weeks. And he made a fairly lengthy trip down the foothills to the U.S. border and back. He visited every remote cabin he came across. But he also preached in the villages, if he could get the word out. And on one September day, he said this. He was preaching in the school in the village. The word had gotten around. From near and far, the people had gathered in wagons drawn by oxen and by horses, in Democrats and in buckboards, many riding broncos. Of his time in Banff and Canmore, he said this. At Canmore, a church was built and a vigorous congregation of miners and railroadmen set it going. The lumber camps ceased to operate, but mills and mines were being opened in many places in the mountains. Life was strenuous and aggressive, and work was expanding every month. It was good to be alive and to have the privilege to take a hand in the extraordinary development of this truly wonderful country. So he was offered, having been here a little more than a year, he was offered a position at an established church in Winnipeg. He turned it down. And part of the reason he turned it down was this church. He was just impressed that people in Canmore built a church. He also found life out here exciting. But after 2.5 years, he was offered another post. This one was, it started out as a missionary placement. It was outside of built-up Winnipeg on the Bald Prairie. It started out with a small wood building and a congregation of a handful. Winnipeg was booming. It was going to be the Chicago of the North. It was expanding massively. And it soon expanded around his church. In a decade and a half, it went from a handful of people to a massive stone church with a congregation of more than 1,000. St. Stephen's. One of the things he fought for was prohibition. He all his life, that was one of the central issues he was concerned about, except when he was a padre in World War I, and the prohibitionists were trying to ban the rum ration for British soldiers. He fought that. He wanted the soldiers to have their rum. Now, at this time, when he was in Winnipeg, early Winnipeg, he was still involved in the missionary service in Western Canada. He made a trip to Toronto to appeal to the National Church for money for the missionary service, and they turned him down. A university friend of his was editing a Presbyterian magazine called The Westminster. Gordon wanted his friend to run an article about the missionary service in the West and, ask for donations. He started an article. He wrote a draft, just full of facts and figures, sent it to his friend. His friend said, boring. His friend said, you keep talking about your experiences in Western Canada as a missionary. Write about those experiences. So he decided to make up a fictional character who was a lot like him in the mountains of the West as a missionary. He sent it to his editor friend again. The editor friend said, too long. Break it into 3 installments. We'll run over 3 months. So he did. Readers liked it. The editor asked him for 3 more installments. How he got his pen. Now, he is the head of the British Canadian Northwest Mission Society. His friend, when the first article was published, his friend, the editor of the magazine, writes to him and says, what name do you want to use? He thought, Presbyterian minister writing adventure stories about the West. Presbyterians aren't that free-spirited. This is probably a bad career move. I better use a pen name. What pen name? He's sitting at his desk, and the letterhead says, Brit.can.north.west mission. He posts on Canmore. So he sends a telegram to there saying, use Canmore, C-A-N-N-O-R. The telegraph operator mangles it. The editor receives a telegram saying, Connor. And the editor plays around with a few first names and finally settles on Rep. And that's how Ralph Connor was born. His first novel was Black Rock, A Tale of the Celebrants. No, pardon me, his first novel was Sky Pilot, A Tale of the Foothills. No, I'm going to back up there. First novel was Black Rock. They took the 6 installments he read and made it into a novel. And Black Rock did pretty well in Canada, enough that he got an offer for his second book. And that was Sky Pilot. Sky Pilot was a breakout novel. It sold hugely internationally. Black Rock is considered the Canmore novel. Although it's set in the Tale of Celebrants, it's still the most Canmore of the settings. Sky Pilot is set somewhere in the foothills. He writes that from the settlement you could see the foothills and the mountains in the background, or you look the other way and see a few foothills on the prairie. You've got to remember he's writing this years after he left this country, so he's doing this from memory. So, Sky Pilot sells over 1 million copies. Now he's established as a world-famous writer. The novels make him rich. He becomes a millionaire. He gets married in Winnipeg to Helen King. He builds himself one of the most impressive mansions in all of Winnipeg. He's also a big man, both in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and even internationally. He's a big man in the Presbyterian Church of Canada. Socially, he mixes at the highest levels. World War I happens. Connor, from his pulpit, preaches utter sacrifice, total effort. His congregation is well over 1,000 people. In the end, almost 350 men in his congregation enlist with the local Winnipeg regiment. Newspapers actually cover his sermons about the war and how Canada needs to make a total effort. As he put it, resolve upon sacrifice to the limit. At the outbreak of the war, Charles Gordon is 54 years old. He's an old man. He's famous. He's rich. He's living in a mansion. He's married. He has 7 kids. He's an important man in his church, locally, nationally, in society, in Winnipeg and nationally. He said this, I could not bear the thought of sending them off to the front without their own minister. And his wife told him, Allies need you to go. Those boys need you more. He enlists. He goes in as a major. When he gets to England with the Cameron Highlanders, the Winnipeg Regiment, the brass do their best to detour him. They strongly suggest he take a staff position, which would have kept him in England. He said, nope, I'm going with soldiers to France, and he does. He goes to France with the regiment, with the battalion, pardon me, in February 1916. Of course, it's awful. He is lucky time after time. Edward, his gardener, and his gardener from the mansion in Winnipeg, goes with him as his Batman valet. One day, on the front line, a bunker, Gordon gets called out to go look at something. The bunker takes a cracked hit. He holds his friend in his arms and dies. He was at Ypres in Somme. The Cameron Highlands of Canada. This is Canadians in the trenches at the Somme. October 7th, 1916. The battalion is moving up to the front line that day. that's a service for the men. As the service is wrapping up, a messenger on horseback appears, hands a slip of paper to his CO, his commanding officer. It's about Gordon. Gordon is being assigned to a medical facility behind the lines. Gordon is outraged. The commanding officer, Colonel, by the way, is one of his closest friends in the day. The Colonel says, orders are orders. Connor says, okay, Gordon says, okay, I want to go find the general who put out this order. After a bit of harassing, finally the CO says, okay, go. He gets on horseback, rides to headquarters. The general's not there. He can't find the general. He returns. And the men are already marching in front. He catches up to them. Here's what he says. I rode after the battalion and caught up with them as they were having a bit of a rest. Too bad, Major, said the commander with a little grin. After all, though, you likely will be of more service to them in the dressing room. I said goodbye to him with an ominous foreboding. He was one of the most active of the elders in my church of St. Stephen's, and my friend. I sat my horse and waved to him and the other officers my farewell. I watched my comrades march past and took their salutes as rank after rank went by. An awful sense of desolation swept over me as they swung out of sight. They were my comrades from my hometown, most of my people, into whose faces I had looked Sunday after Sunday in St. Stephen's Church. Except for a poor remnant, I never saw them again. What is God doing, I said to myself, and rode back to the dressing station, reporting for duty to the medical officer in command. Another shot in the Somme, a painting of the Battle of the Somme. The next day, October 8th, the Canadians went over the top at 4:50 a.m. in the rain. An artillery barrage was supposed to have taken out the barbed wire from the German machine guns. The barbed wire was intact, the machine guns were intact. They were slaughtered. As you can see here, about 100 of that battalion, about 1,100 men were over the top. The next morning, roll call, only 73 men showed up. The commanding officer, a colonel, was his good friend, a senior elder in his church, his lawyer in Winnipeg, and the man who invested his fortune for him. Word comes from Winnipeg that the executors of Robertson's CO's estate are in trouble. They're in trouble sorting out his estate because a lot of the investments were tied to Connor's investments. Pardon, Gordon. Gordon requests permission for a short trip back to Canada to sort this out. He goes back to Winnipeg and learns that when he left for the war, he was a millionaire. All his money's gone. Robertson had invested in real estate in a booming Winnipeg, heavily mortgaged real estate. When the boom went bust, both of them were wiped out financially. Gordon had gone from being a millionaire to almost $100,000 in debt. He's in his mid-50s. He never recovered financially, and after his death, the city of Winnipeg seized his big fancy mansion for unpaid taxes. Gordon would never allow anybody in his presence to speak of what had happened, what Robertson had done. On his trip back to Canada, before he got to Winnipeg, he stopped off in Ottawa. He had an interview with Sam Hughes, Minister of War, and 2 interviews with Sir Robert Borden, the Prime Minister. They wanted to take on a new role. They didn't want him going back to France. They wanted him to tour the United States on a speaking tour, trying to bring the Americans into the war. At first, he said he wanted to go back to France, and the Prime Minister looked at him and said, "You're a soldier, aren't you?" He said, "Yes." I said, "I'm giving you an order." And he stayed while I was speaking to him. He hobnobbed with high society. He spoke at Harvard and Yale Alumni Association dinners. He had a 15-minute interview with the President of the United States Woodrow Wilson, it turned into 2 hours. Henry Ford had him for dinner, and sheepishly brought out his entire collection of Connor novels and asked if the author wouldn't mind signing them all. He wrote 2 novels about the war. One, The Major, published in 1918. It was a bestseller in the U.S. and the 3rd best-selling book in Canada that year. It was pure war propaganda, recruitment propaganda, trying to get people to sign up, trying to get people to buy war bonds to support the war. When the war, he also then made a recruiting speaking tour across Canada. And he was unabashedly in favor of the Empire, the British Empire fighting this war. The war ends. The Winnipeg General Strike in 1919. Biggest strike in history, one of the most violent in history. Winnipeg was shut down for a week. There were massive protests. The RCMP charged protesters, beat them, fired on them. 2 men were killed. Federal soldiers were patrolling the streets. The Manitoba government responded afterwards by setting up the Joint Council of Industry, a big and very powerful industrial relations commission. They made Ralph Connor the chair. He served in that role for 4 years. He claims that the commission, during his tenure, mediated 117 labor disputes and without one single strike. He became the moderator of the Presbyterian Church of Canada in 1922 and stayed in that role until 25. He was a huge force for the formation of the United Church of Canada, which happened in 1925. He did a speaking tour across the country. The United Church, of course, came out of the Presbyterian, Methodist, and Congregationalist churches. The big meeting, the final big meeting to decide the fate of the Presbyterians, was the National Assembly held in a church in Toronto in 1925. Those Presbyterians opposed to church union, were determined to stop that, to prevent that meeting from conducting any business. Essentially, they were going to shut down the whole thing. So people are shouting and yelling in the meeting. The meeting held in church. Gordon spots the church's organist. He goes over to the organist and says, "Go to your organ and play Handel's Hallelujah Chorus as loudly as you can." Which he did. And Gordon stepped up to the podium, and when he thought the room was ready, he signaled to the organist to stop playing and start speaking. He kept writing. He wrote all his life. These are books he wrote in the last 8 years of his life. A lot of them are adventure pieces, but going back in history, some aren't. They're set in places, they're still set in the West, still set in Glengarry, but they're also set in places like Niagara, Quebec, Cape Breton, rural Manitoba. But the audience has dropped off for his books. As one historian puts it, his writing had lost, quote, its vigor and greatness. His books, fundamentally, sure there was bad people doing bad things, and people got maimed and killed, and people were greedy and selfish, but by and large, there was lots of redemption. His books were optimistic about human nature and about the potential for individual salvation. And after World War I, that wasn't the mood of the public. The public was disillusioned. He died in 1937. Age 77, he's buried in a cemetery in Winnipeg. The gravestone bears 2 names, Charles Gordon and Ralph Connor, and the inscription says these things about him: minister of the gospel, author, Canadian, born in Glengarry. He wrote his memoir, his autobiography, in the last year of his life. And it has a typically Ralph Connor title. Straightforward, simple English. It wasn't published till after he died. It was published posthumously. And what an adventure it was, that one. I'd like to wrap up by reading a passage from one of his novels set in this area. He's describing the mountains. Here's what he says. We paused to take in the beauty of the night. The moon rode high over the peaks of the mountains, flooding the narrow valley with mellow light. Under her magic, The rugged peaks soften their harsh lines and seem to lean lovingly toward us. The dark pine masses stood silent as in breathless adoration. The dazzling snow lay like a garment over all the open space and soft waving folds, and crowned every stump with a quaintly shaped nightcap. Above the camps, the smoke curled up from the campfires, standing like pillars of cloud that kept watch while men slept. And high over all, the deep blue night sky with its star jewels sprang like the roof of a great cathedral from range to range, covering us in its kindly shelter. How homelike and safe seemed the valley, with its mountain sides, sentinel trees, and arching roof of jeweled sky. Even the night seemed kindly and friendly to the stars, and the lone cry of the wolf in the deep forest seemed like the voice of a comrade. Thank you.
On behalf of Ralph Conner of Royal United Church, Jack, I'd like to thank you. It was fascinating. I was fascinated by the name Colin, where it came from. I have no idea. It comes from Thank you for taking time out of your vacation, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your time here. And I hope you can get that in your case.
That is, thank you very much. Wonderful.
And it's just a camera. Thank you so much.
Other questions?
I have to say,
Yes.
Does he have any descendants today?
I don't know about today. He had a daughter who went on to be a writer. He had a son who was heavily involved in the founding of the CCF, which came to do the Democratic Party, and also worked with the League of Nations. No, I'm not sure.
We had the church open a few summers ago, and I can't remember, but it was a relative of Charles Gordon. He was about maybe 40, and he was a few generations down and away, but that's why they came, because it was a relative. We might be able to find it on the old guest book, because I made sure he signed the guest book. So.
He also had a grandson who was an editor of the Ottawa Citizen and the Ottawa Citizen's humor columns. Yes.
Yes, he did have Charlie Gordon as his grandson, a friend of mine, wrote for the Ottawa Citizen. And as I was sitting here, I took a picture of the cover on the Sky Pilot, and I emailed him and said, I'm about to listen to a lecture on your grandfather. So he's written back and said hello.
I used to read him. You know all those?
Yeah, and I realized, I always wondered why someone would call his son King. But I realize now it's the mother's name.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Charles Gordon had it, his son was King Gordon,
Yeah.
and his son was Charlie Gordon. But I never knew, why would someone call their son King anyway? You had that name burned with it.
And I don't know what King Gordon did in the founding of CCF, but I know he's a major figure.
King Gordon was highly involved with the CCF.
Yeah.
He was a big guy. He was, and they had a cottage outside of Winnipeg, and what's that big lake?
Lake of the
I
Woods.
think like the woods.
Lake of the Woods. And I visited there, and they still do the trick. I'm here to tell you, with a tablecloth lifting up.
It was done there.
I was there.
Yeah. But they did the
They
trick.
didn't do it to me, they did it to my husband. Oh, and there's also Allison Gordon, was Charlie's sister, and she was a good friend of mine and a baseball writer, the first woman baseball writer for the Toronto Star. Now dead, unfortunately.
So several of the kids followed in Dad's footsteps.
Yes.
Kids and grandkids followed in the footsteps of Ralph Conner.
we dedicated the hall as Gordon Hall. I think it was about the 100th anniversary of the church, and a number of relatives came from Winnipeg at that time.
Oh, cool.
I wonder, do you know the name of the town near Stratford where he was?
Good question. It's a village. It's Harrington, and the church there is Knox Church, and my wife, who is right here, and her sitting beside her, they're Mansons. The Manson clan were farmers around that village. There's a slew of Mansons buried in that church graveyard, so we figure that probably some of their ancestors sat in the pews and watched the father, Daniel Gordon, preach, and may have known the son, Charles Gordon. I would say Charles Gordon probably, as a teenage boy, probably had your great-great-grandfather.
Where is he buried? Is it Riceville?
He's buried in the old Kildone Cemetery in Winnipeg.
Oh, and where is that?
Sorry?
Where is that?
In Winnipeg.
Oh, in Winnipeg. Oh, okay. Okay.
Hang on, I've got a stone here somewhere, right there.
Yes, yeah.
Who's beside him?
His wife.
His wife.
Thank you very much.